welcome again to Sahara TV. With us in the studio today and to discuss one of the trending issues that has to do with the Ecowas sanctions on the Niger Republic, Coup, the crisis in Niger, is the Secretary General of the Movement for Socialist Alternative, Daggar, Tola. It's a pleasure having you on Sahara TV.
Thank you very much.
One of the trending news today in Nigerian newspapers headlines has to do with the sanctions, so fresh sanctions being imposed upon Niger Republic. Nigerians are opposed to the sanctions and the Nigerians' involvement in the crisis in Niger Republic. Considering President Tinubu's attempt to absolve Nigeria out of it, that it is the Ecowas that is taking the lead as far as these actions is concerned, and considering Ecowas' historical response to political crisis in West Africa, could you give us the actions taken so far? How effective has it been?
Now let's provide a clarification that without Nigeria, ECOWAS practically, will be a new organization. In terms of budget, in terms of financing. So let's make that very, very clear. So there can be no place for the Tinubu regime to hide behind the fact that, ECOWAS as an institution or as a body is the one, planning to invade Niger Republic or imposing sanctions on the Niger Republic. Electricity has been cut off. Borders bordering over 7 states in Nigeria have been closed down in relation to Niger Republic. These actions have not been taken by ECOWAS. As we speak today, ECOWAS as a body is divided against itself. There are those who are opposed to invading that country, and countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea have come all out clear to point out that position. Returning back to the question of sanctions, we will suffer from the sanctions that will be imposed, or that has been imposed on Niger Republic. Take electricity, for example, and this is where the Tinubu regime is failing to understand the huge contradictions that is plaguing the whole of the African continent. And what is showcasing is that they are still, because what is foreign policy? Foreign policy is a reflection of your domestic policy. And we have seen all of the policies that the Tinubu regime has imposed on Nigeria since it came to power on the 29th of May this year. And that policy program has been extended in transforming the Tinubu regime and the whole of ECOWAS to a lackey of French imperialism. Nigeria provides electricity to Niger Republic. And yet Niger Republic is the number 7th highest producer of uranium all over the world. It means that from the uranium that is available even in Niger Republic, it is unable to power or provide electricity for its own people. And this is the huge contradiction that plagues the whole question of neo-colonialism and imperialism on the whole of the African continent. Africa has never left the pit of colonialism that it was doomed to just serve as a basis of providing raw materials to the whole of Western Europe. And without industrialization, how can we begin to provide jobs for all of the millions and billions of people on the whole of the African continent? And this is where we must come out clear to say that we are opposed to sanctions, because these sanctions, it is the ordinary people, it is the working people in Niger Republic that will be made to suffer. And these people are not responsible, for the failure of the Bazuma regime. Or were they responsible for the coup plotters that have taken over power in Niger Republic? So I think we must come out clear to say that. There's a second issue to sanction. And that is the fact that Nigerians do not immediately forget. If the Tinubu regime has forgotten, it should be reminded that Niger Republic hosts a refugee camp of Nigerians, a fallout of its own failure to successfully combat the jihadist insurgents as represented by Boko Haram, and ISWAP group in Nigeria. So let's return back to this issue of military coup. I think we must also point out that we are opposed to war. We are opposed to Nigerians going to war. We are opposed to sending Nigerian soldiers to go and be shot and killed in defense of a bourgeois democracy that is clear to the mass of the working people, not just in Niger Republic, but even in Nigeria as well. That it has not helped, it has not done anything to improve the welfare and lives of the mass of the working people.
maybe Tinubu knows something that Nigerians don't know. And it is clear to some of us what he thinks that Nigerians don't know, is that there is an attempt for the Tinubu regime to take this action as a form of self-preservation for itself. But let us return back to our history. Why do soldiers plot coups? Soldiers plot coups because governments fail, to be representative of what? Of their mass of the working people. And it was Babangida who classically pointed this out, explaining why they took over power in Nigeria, that they wait for elections to be conducted, to be rigged, and on that basis, so classically, Nigeria itself is ripe for such an action, even though we must point out that we are opposed to military coups as well. But in saying that we are opposed to war, does it now mean that we must come in defense of the coup plotters that have taken over power in the Niger Republic or in all of these other African countries? We must say no to that as well. And this point must be made quite clear. The jihadists themselves, what interests do they represent? Are they empowering the working masses to become those who will decide the affairs of their destiny? So far in the Niger Republic, that point has not been seen.
Now, let me just quickly get your perspective on this. I mean, what are the major challenges that Ecowas face in mediating the political crisis that's happening in Niger with respect to this coup and within its member countries?
This question of mediation and diplomacy is that what does West Africa, all of the leaders in West Africa, who are they? What is the state of the whole of the economy of the West African economy? The whole Sahel region is dominated by jihadist insurgencies, which in itself is an indication of a failure of governance of all of these member countries of ECOWAS. So you have a situation where those who are out to go and mediate are going to mediate over an issue that ultimately they can't resolve. Because even in their own countries, as the case of Nigeria is, the Nigerian military has proved incapable of defeating Boko Haram. And these are not trained regular army. They have failed to defeat the huge numbers of bandits that exist all over the whole of northern Nigeria. This is the same regular army. And like the rank and file Nigerian military have pointed out, it is not because they are unwilling to fight. It is because war for the generals and the top echelons of the ruling classes in Nigeria offers another opportunity to make more money. We must not easily forget that Nigeria led Ecowas with ECOMOG to Liberia. And it was another opportunity for the Abacha regime to loot the wealth of this country. So this war for Tinubu regime could only provide one thing. Another means for generals to be settled, to dip their hand into the wealth of Nigeria. It's also another opportunity for the Tinubu regime, like we have pointed out, to send a warning to any attempt by officers to think that they want to overthrow him. But more importantly, is that Tinubu regime is making itself out to become a lackey for French imperialism. The whole of French West Africa is economically controlled and dominated by what? By France. You will expect that Macron, and what did how has Macron reacted to this coup? His first statement was that it was a dangerous and illegitimate attempt by the junta in taking over power. The second statement of Macron is extremely very important, and that if their interest in Niger is threatened, that they will react with all maximum ability. And what does that state? What is Macron and French interest in Niger Republic? The interest is simple: uranium. And they are unwilling to lose that control and dominance. So we must point out clearly to the Tinubu regime that it must not transform Nigeria, which is a lackey of the IMF and World Bank, to a new lackey of French imperialism. And it is from this point of view that I think we must use this platform to call on the trade unions in Nigeria to be in the forefront of leading a campaign to ensure that Nigerian soldiers are not trooped out into Niger Republic to go and be shot or to go and be killed.
Now let's also look at the role of ECOWAS, especially in promoting stability and democracy in West African region. Has ECOWAS failed?
You see, the bourgeois democracy in Africa up till this point is a failure. And to the point that you have an organization of the same leaders who have failed in their various African states, constituting a state, then where is the scorecard? You will expect that when ECOWAS was formed in 1973-74, some of the major aims and objectives was to unite the whole of West Africa. West Africa is still as divided. Of course, you can move from one country to another country, but that in itself does not define, any form of unity, of political unity or economic unity. Interestingly, in spite of all of this free movement from one West African state to another West African state, we have seen Nigerians, deported from Ghana in mass numbers. We have seen Nigerians, also deport Ghanaians in mass numbers over various economic crises in all of these countries. So, what role has West Africa, as this organization, played? Beyond that, it is increasingly becoming, a gang, an organization, of African leaders, of West African leaders, who think that they can use that body to protect themselves from the anger of the mass of the working people. Nigerians are extremely angered against their government. And not just so. In the whole of Sahara, West Africa, where we have had one coup after the other coup, the number one reason that has been put forward is the question of insecurity. This insecurity itself, and this is where we disagree with the coup plotters, to think that the issue confronting us is a military issue.
Exactly. I was actually going to ask you.
Which is why we are seeing this alliance and romance with the Wagner Group, as represented by Prisgon. But what does the Wagner Group represent? We must also point out to those who don't know that a new Cold War is already on. A new Cold War led by US imperialism with China and Russia at another angle. And this is the very same reason why the Tinubu regime must not fall into the trap, of becoming, an agent for French imperialism to launch a war into Niger Republic. Because, as Macron has pointed out, it wants to protect its interests. The protection of the interests of France in West Africa continue to deny the mass of the working people in West Africa the right to employ their own resources to improve and better their lot. And this interest means that they want to continue to lord themselves over the wealth of the whole of West Africa.
Now, are there any lessons that can be learned from Ecowas' handling of previous political crises in the region that could be applied to the current situation in Niger?
Let's point out that there are people who have given the beautiful example of how Buhari, went to Gambia, when there was a coup there, and you could have a negotiated settlement out of the whole issues. But at stake with this current coup is a question of French imperialism. It's a question of people tired about the kind of life that they are living. They want a change. And you have some set of young officers who think that they can offer that hope. But it's also important to point out that the hope represented by these young officers will not also move West Africa or the whole of Africa forward. They make an error to think that the problem in West Africa are the jihadists. The jihadist fundamentalists are also responding to what? To an issue. And that problem that they are responding to is the question of poverty. It's the question of the failure of the entirety of the old ruling class to take control of the wealth and resources of Africa and use these resources to develop the means of production and begin to better the lot of the mass of the working people. And that tax is not a tax for any military adventurers. It's a tax for millions and billions of the mass of the working people in West Africa. And which is why what is happening, should provide a better opportunity to harm the working masses who are trooping behind the juntas in all of these countries. Because Russia held a Russian African summit with 43 heads of states. Of course, Tinubu was not in attendance. The vice president was in attendance. And one of the resolutions from that statement, was the desire that we are now in a multipolar world, the right of Africa to align with any force of the country. And Ramaphosa in South Africa demonstrated himself to be more wiser, with the way, of course, he's playing the West against the interests of China and Russia. And we have a Tinubu regime that has failed to appropriately read the current international situation so that Nigerians and the entirety of the mass of the working people will benefit from this current situation. To be seen as opposed to those who are opposed to French imperialism and become a lackey of it to invade Niger Republic will not put Nigerians who are everywhere in the world in any good picture or in any good light as things are currently.
So considering all this overview that you've given and that you brought to the fore, I mean, how do you envision the long-term and the short-term impact of the crisis in Niger with regards to regional stability and security in Nigeria and West Africa as a whole?
Now, I think we must point out that there's already instability in West Africa, given the jihadist insurgents. And which is why it is seemingly believed, not just seemingly believed, it is practical. There are a lot of Malians in Nigerians who celebrated the coup in Niger. In my area, they celebrated the coup in Niger. For them, it means that you now have a new military government that will join forces with Burkina Faso and the one in Mali, and of course with Guinea, to create a united military force that can combat the jihadists. But we must point out that in resolving this contradiction lies in putting forward a program of socialist alternative. And we say this without mincing words, because Africa is rich. The wealth of Africa is enough if employed, if nationalized and democratically managed. And if these new regimes are not putting this type of program forward, it means that they will fail. It's important again to return back to our history, because this is not the first phase of coups we are having in Africa. We had the young radical officers coup, led by Thomas Sankara, J.J. Rawlings. In fact, his J.J. became Junior Jesus as a messiah. So this is not the first time we are seeing young officers being crowned as messiahs. What is the scorecard of these first generations of messiahs of junior officers coup on the African continent? At the end of the day, the so-called Junior Jesus, J.J. Rawlings, became the #1 guinea pig for the IMF and World Bank. When Ghana currency was entirely devalued and all the programs of neoliberalism and privatization was employed in Africa. What is Sankara's own scorecard? Who continues to remain one of the best examples of leaders that have ruled the African continent? He was shot down, without a grave over his name when French imperialism, mobilized his own forces against him. Of course, this is not to say that the program that Thomas Sankara implemented in Burkina Faso was not inspiring. The point that is being made is that our duty ultimately is to empower the mass of the working people themselves, providing the necessary leadership along the rank file of the military and the police. And this is where I think we must send this call that rank and file members of the military and the police are working people. They are members of the working masses. The alliance should not be with the generals and the mass, should not be with the generals and the mass of members of the ruling class, but with the mass of ordinary workers that they themselves are part of. And in a united, political organization of ordinary people, of soldiers and rank and file, we can reclaim Africa, for Africans. On the basis of the huge wealth of Africa, we can commence the process of industrialization of the African continent and begin the process of creating as many millions of jobs as possible for all of the youths, all over Africa. And you can create a new hope, for an African continent that continues to claim the right that it is the birthplace of humanity. If Africa, the birthplace of humanity, one of the first centers of human civilization, not just by giving human beings to the world, but one of the first centers that introduced civilization in all spheres of human endeavor, can be seen in this spot state of what? Of billions of its members, of its inhabitants in poverty. It means that what is wrong with us is not with our genetics. What is wrong with us is the system, and the world system that has trapped Africa in the bottomless pit, of employing its own wealth and resources to develop, Europe and America.
Now let's look.